BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello everybody, and welcome to this bonus episode of Black Box Online Radio. In this episode I will be discussing the Yuba County Five and the book Things Aren't Right, The Disappearance of the Yuba County Five by Tony Wright. This is a case that I've talked about a little bit on the channel in the past, and I have to emphasize that a little bit. In 2021, I had the opportunity to read Drew Beeson's book, which is called Out of Bounds, about the disappearance of the Yuba County Five. And I used to do a segment every Wednesday called the AMA, the Ask Me Anything, where I would respond to your questions and comments. And I've mentioned this disappearance on the channel before, but this was my first opportunity to do an in-depth standalone episode on the Yuba County Five. And I'm going to go right over to Tony Wright's book and read the description. Things Aren't Right. The Disappearance of the Yuba County Five explores the bizarre and tragic 1978 disappearance of Ted Weyer, Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, Jackie Hewitt, and Gary Mathias in the Plumas National Forest in Northern California. 4 of these men had intellectual disabilities, while one was diagnosed with schizophrenia. On Friday, February 28th of 1978, they left the Yuba County, California area in Madruga's 1968 Mercury Montego to attend a basketball game in Chico, California. 4 days later, the car they were traveling in was found abandoned on a snow-covered road in the mountains of the Plumas National Forest, some 75 miles in the wrong direction from home. 4 jurisdictions of law enforcement would investigate and search for the missing men. Psychics were even brought in, and there were strange reports of sightings of the 5 from numerous people. One witness came forward with an incredible story of seeing the men disappear into the forest that night. Yet every lead came to a dead end. About 4 months after they vanished, 4 of the 5 men's remains were found some 12 miles from the car, with one discovered in a U.S. Forest Service trailer with plenty of food and fuel to keep them alive for months. Once described as bizarre as hell, the case of the Yuba County Five has baffled law enforcement and the families of the missing men for over 45 years. Tony Wright has meticulously researched the case, earning himself the reputation of being one of the foremost authorities on the subject, and his conclusions are likely as close as anyone will come to making sense of this tragedy. And yes, as I said, Drew Beeson also has a book out on this subject, and he's had Tony Wright as a guest on his program. Drew Beeson runs his own YouTube channel, and he's interviewed Tony Wright multiple times and openly says that Tony Wright's book, Things Aren't Right, The Disappearance of the Yuba County Five, is the Bible of information on the case. To be clear, the person who was found in the trailer was Ted Weyer, and the person who had schizophrenia was Gary Mathias. And these 5 individuals are referred to as the boys, although they were all adult males. The youngest was Jackie, who was 24 years old, and the oldest was Ted, who was 32 years old. Now, I'm going to share some things about how I originally encountered the material. Back in 2021, when I was just glancing at this subject, I was perhaps under a few misconceptions, and I want to be clear about some things, that these boys were athletes. As I said, I'm just going to call them the boys because that's how they're referred to in most sources. They were athletes, they played basketball, and they disappeared after they went to a UC Davis basketball game. And even in Tony Wright's book, it says that there isn't an exact reason why they became fans of the UC Davis basketball team. It was just one of those things that someone decided to like, and this group of 5 boys goes to see the basketball game. They were playing against Chico State. The next day, they had their own basketball game. That's a different basketball game, which was like the Special Olympics, but it was a tournament. And if they won the tournament, they would have a chance to go play in Los Angeles. Now, it seems like some of them, even though they had intellectual disabilities, mostly they were aware of their faculties. Gary Mathias was the one who had schizophrenia. And when I've watched the interviews with Tony Wright and Drew Beeson, they talk about some things that people do in terms of jumping to conclusions. And I did the exact same things. For example, I was even reading Drew Beeson's book Out of Bounds, and I was just thinking that, okay, well, I mean, these guys have intellectual disabilities. One of them had schizophrenia, and did he just have a psychotic episode and go berserk on the other individuals, and he confused them, and that's how they ended up in the wilderness? And Tony Wright openly says that in the early parts of his book, and he's also said it in other places online. That is just jumping to conclusions. I definitely thought about it, and I'm sure a lot of people would think about it. Some other background information on Gary Mathias that is included in the book, Things Aren't Right, is that he did have run-ins with the law. Gary Mathias was known to experience deviant behavior. In one story, he was sitting on the grass near a cemetery and he was smoking, and he was talking about how he wanted to break into a mausoleum because they had Bibles in the top and he wanted to have access to them. And then the next day, he gets arrested for real-life GTA Grand Theft Auto, although there were two other individuals in the car. And if I can understand how Tony Wright has presented the story in his book, it might be that the two other individuals were the ones who actually were responsible for the auto theft, and they just let Gary Mathias take the fall for it. But the point is that he did have run-ins with the law. However, at the same time, Gary Mathias was also ex-Army, and this goes to show that even though he had schizophrenia, he was medicated for it, and he had done things in his life that would have required cognitive functions. There are different levels of schizophrenia. When some people are under the influence of their medications, they perform very well in life. And when there are also extremely intense clinical cases where someone has to be institutionalized. And something that the family really wanted to emphasize is that they did not believe that Gary Mathias just snapped and had a psychotic episode and that he turned on the boys and he did something to cause the disappearance, because that seemed rather unlikely. As someone who runs a true crime channel here and deals with a lot of different cases, I think that it's entirely possible for someone to have some type of unforeseen psychotic episode. Certain people can have triggers, but I do have to admit that there is insufficient evidence to support that. And ultimately, that's what we begin to experience when we are looking at missing persons cases. On Black Box Online Radio, I talk about a lot of unsolved mysteries, such as the Zodiac Killer, Jack the Ripper, and D.B. Cooper, but these are quite different than missing persons cases, and also just trying to find out what happened in these, well, we don't even necessarily know all the details about what happened to the Yuba County Five, but I think that you get pulled into a particular type of world where you do want to know the truth. And there is a statement that is actually in the foreword to the book that is written by someone named Shannon McGarvey that says, "If you get into this story, you will ache to know the truth." That's what it says. You will ache to know the truth. And I totally understand, because missing persons cases are quite different than some of these unsolved serial killer stories like the Zodiac and Jack the Ripper, or other criminal issues like D.B. Cooper. Because with the disappearance of the Yuba County Five, we know so much about what happened to everyone before the disappearance and absolutely nothing about what happened after the disappearance. And if we do think we know something, it's questionable. I do confess that this is a rather different type of missing persons case, because there is only one person who has never been located, and his name was Gary Mathias. All of the four other boys were located at some point. So after their car goes to this place, as it says here, 75 miles in the wrong direction from home, ultimately they make their way to this Forest Service trailer, and a window is broken in, and there are food rations in the trailer. And I believe that it was in an interview that Tony Wright did with Drew Beeson, where he stated that the rations were actually good for up to a year, but definitely at least 6 months, according to the understanding of all the sources. So there was food in the trailer. There was also a fireplace. There were propane tanks. And there were ways to warm the trailer up. There was also no effort that was made upon discovery to close the window that had been broken into. So there are a couple theories that people have as to how and why they would have entered the trailer. One could be that they were moving toward the trailers because their car was stuck in the snow, and that they just didn't want to take things that were not theirs. And again, only one person was found in the trailer who chose to stay. But another puzzling detail about that is Ted is the only one who stays in the trailer to his death. And when he was found dead, it was at least 8 weeks, and this was estimated because of his beard growth. And then, as I said, there were 3 others who were found outside of the trailer at various distances. and by the time they were located, their bodies were decomposing. Now, if this information is accurate, I actually heard this on Dr. Todd Grande's channel, that Ted's body was found wrapped in sheets and blankets that were found in the trailer, and it was almost as if somebody else had wrapped them, but I really have no way of knowing if that is 100% true. And one theory that exists is that Ted may have done it himself just as a way to stay warm, and he was really wrapped up, so he was just trying to do that to fight off the cold. But when I was looking at Tony Wright's observations on the case, he seems quite puzzled as to how the boys would have ended up at the trailer in the first place when they're more or less going in the wrong direction, and they're going down roads that they should not have been familiar with, that they would not have had any reason to use, going in the wrong direction for so long, and just getting stuck in the snow, although it seems like they perhaps weren't truly stuck in the snow and they could have gotten the car out. Bear in mind that there were 5 of them, and as previously stated, they were athletes. They had a basketball tournament the next day, and or is it just a string of bad decisions that was all just compounding upon itself? Like, some people do get lost, and then they get confused, and they keep trying to do things. But another theory that does exist is that they left the basketball game with Chico State, and that some group of individuals started a confrontation with them. There was some type of trigger that maybe they didn't mean to do anything wrong, but they angered another group, and they were chased to that specific area, and that ultimately they were trying to escape these people that were coming after them. Or was it even something a little bit more sinister, that they were held up and someone is trying to demand a ransom or some type of extortion of money, and then they just simply didn't understand or know what to say to get them to stop, so they just kept waiting in the trailer? It becomes almost impossible to know. As I said, we know an enormous amount of information that happened before the disappearance, and almost nothing that happened afterwards. But at this time, I would like to just ask you guys, do you have any first impressions about the disappearance of the Yuba County Five? Do you have any first instincts or responses about hearing this information about 5 guys who go to a basketball game, then they end up 75 miles in the wrong direction with no conceivable reason why they should be there, entering the forest trailer? One person stays in the trailer, 3 of the bodies found outside of the trailer, and then you have one who is never found. Do you have any immediate responses? And I told you my absolute immediate take on the subject was that Gary Mathias had a schizophrenic episode or a psychotic episode because of his schizophrenia, and that he caused the disappearance. But that, again, is heavily disputed by almost everyone. And again, from reading Tony Wright's book, it doesn't appear that there's any evidence of that. But I would like to know what you guys think. And as previously stated, you can tune into some other content here on Black Box Online Radio. Every Monday I do a segment about the Zodiac Killer. Every Wednesday, one about Jack the Ripper, and every Friday, one about D.B. Cooper. And for the summer, I am going live on Tuesdays and Thursdays, most Thursdays anyway, and I will be doing True Crime Talk Radio in the morning, where any subject is fair game. You can put anything you want in the live chat, but mostly focusing on forensics, criminal psychology, and criminology, and ways that we can connect them to other true crime cases. But you can tune in Tuesdays and Thursdays at 10:30 a.m. here on Black Box Online Radio. And if you want to support all of these efforts, you can hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And you can also go through some of the links in the description box. One of them is for buymeacoffee.com. Buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88 allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. Now, as I was reading Tony Wright's book, he goes to a point where there are witnesses who may have seen the boys after their alleged disappearance, and there are witness sightings. And I think the exact quotation that is found in Tony Wright's book is, "The good news for law enforcement is that there was a witness, and his name was Joseph Shones. The bad news for law enforcement is they had a witness, and his name was Joseph Shones." And then there's a chapter that is devoted and dedicated to the story of Joseph, and he also seems like someone who was experiencing some unfortunate luck that night. He got stuck in the snow, and then he was trying to get his car out of the snow, and he had a mild heart attack. but it is possible that he was the last person to see the boys alive. And, I mean, the problem is, though, and I think Tony Wright is almost in agreement, is that even if he did see them, he wasn't able to provide a lot of critical or helpful information. What I was much more fascinated with was that later on, someone would come forward and say that she saw four of the boys, not five, but four of them, at a store in Brownsville, California, either the day after, but don't quote me on that one, but it's after the time of the disappearance. There's a possible witness sighting of four of them at a store in Brownsville. And I'm going to be very honest with you, and I'm going out on a limb here. I don't believe the Brownsville sighting, because in missing persons cases, in these high-profile disappearances, very frequently we hear a story that's too good to be true, where someone is just absolutely convinced that they saw so-and-so at a store or at some type of public location like a gas station or a bus terminal, and I think that perhaps she just saw four people who had some similar appearances. I mean, I cannot tell you how many times I've read this stuff in the comment section on YouTube when somebody even said, that after Maura Murray went missing in 2004, that, oh yeah, I saw her at a supermarket once, and I was like, hi, Maura, and she said hi and then ran away. I mean, did that really happen? I mean, maybe they did see somebody at the supermarket and they did say that, but was it actually the missing person? So the point is that sometimes people are mistaken. And based on everything else that we've read and heard and encountered, I haven't seen any evidence that the boys ever left the forest, that they ever left the Plumas National Forest. And there is a theory that was put forward on Dr. Todd Grande's YouTube channel, and that was that, could this have been a string of bad decisions, that one thing happened after another, that there were just a bunch of steps that took place where people were making mistakes over and over again. Maybe someone's trying to take a shortcut, or maybe someone genuinely took a wrong turn. Bear in mind, in the 1970s, they wouldn't have been using GPS. They wouldn't even be using MapQuest. And they got lost. So then they keep trying to solve the problem. And ultimately, they kept making it worse, and people started to get nervous. People started to panic. Maybe they tried to look for help, but that wouldn't explain why they got so far from the trailer. And as far as the actions and activities of Gary Mathias, Dr. Todd Grande's response was that he simply thought that while some people stayed closer to the trailer, Gary Mathias just kept moving throughout the woods, and it is quite a shock that he would have been doing this without any type of winter clothing, or he would have just been in normal street clothes, and he didn't go into hypothermia at freezing temperatures for as long as he did, but he probably just wandered out into the absolute middle of nowhere and passed away and succumbed to the elements. Other theories that exist is that there was some type of paranoia that took place. Now, this would relate more to a condition like schizophrenia, where somebody such as Gary Mathias would believe that somebody was after them, someone was trying to stop them, someone was trying to hurt them, and there wasn't any external threat, but just telling people that there was an external threat. And, I mean, that is more of an educated guess, I think, or maybe even a sub-educated guess, more like a suspicion that people would have. I don't necessarily know if there's any evidence that would indicate that paranoia caused the disappearance. Now, the string of bad decisions, countless people have had a string of bad decisions, and they've been lost over and over again, and they've tried to wave people down for help or find some type of house or something where they can call and ask to use a phone or just ask for directions, and things get worse and worse. But there is still a lot of guesswork all the same. But if these are all examples of stories where there is insufficient evidence, what type of evidence do we actually have about the Yuba County Five? What exactly did this witness, Joseph Shones, see and do? So as I said, he had a heart attack, and he shares some types of bizarre stories, and this is from pages 123 and 124 in the book by Tony Wright, and it just says that he is trying to get the attention of people. At one point it says that he may have seen between 2 to 12 people while he is just waiting for help and calling for help, and he may have seen the boys that night, and that they ran away from him. That was his perception of this, that he saw either some group of individuals that were most likely the boys in the Plumas National Forest, and he just thinks that they ran away from him. So he gets back in his car, he waits and rests, and then he is actually moving to a place called the Mountain House. And it says that he had to slowly walk there, just kind of walk through the snow and rest, and that was between 4 a.m. and 10 a.m. It sounds extremely painful, and even though he goes on to become a witness that is not extremely reliable, that does sound like it is something that is just very saddening and very difficult. And I mean, my judgment might be a little bit skewed, and my perception of the events might be a little bit distracted if I were also having a heart attack and just was stuck in a national forest as well. One thing that I noticed while I was reading the book Things Aren't Right, The Disappearance of the Yuba County Five, is Tony Wright paid a lot of attention to exploring the terrain that would have been around not only people like Joseph Shones, but also the boys, of course, and that is that parts of California are going to be extremely rural and uninhabited, and we see this time and time again in other true crime cases, such as the disappearance of Donna Lass, who went missing in 1970, and her remains were found in 1986 in a rural part of Placer County, and she might have been in the ground for 16 years until someone found skeletal remains, and also other true crime stories where people talk about confrontations in the California wilderness because they're just miles and miles from civilization. And when I was reading the chapter on the Plumas National Forest, it's chapter 12 actually, it talks about just people get lost there all the time, and that people get not only lost, but even when they are trying to just do things like routine hiking, it can be very difficult to navigate the land. So this would also support the theory that there was some type of just problem about taking wrong turns and getting confused, getting disoriented, and one thing would lead to another, and ultimately they would get distracted. That just brings up the question of why would they go to that trailer, not use anything, and be just in that terrible situation for at least 8 weeks? Another important thing to remember about this disappearance is that there are multiple witnesses, or multiple alleged witnesses, actually. For example, in one of the chapters that's in the middle part of the book, there's someone who comes forward named Slater A. Judd Jr., and he claims that he knows what happened to the Yuba County Five, and that his claim, I mean, it's not even presented as a theory, it's presented as a claim, is that a rogue group of ex-Marines with ties to the KKK did the thing. Well, they did similar things to people where they would hunt them down and then they would kidnap innocent people. Now, it would beg the question as to why ex-Marines would be doing this, but why would the KKK be targeting a group of Caucasian males? And that they were just robbed, and then they were even sometimes taken into a helicopter, and it says thrown out of the helicopter without parachutes. Now, you might be thinking that that sounds like it's completely ridiculous, and ultimately I think it is. So this just goes to show about how people are going to be making things more difficult. This is what I was talking about with the Brownsville disappearance and sighting, because I've noticed when I used to follow missing persons cases in the past, like the disappearance of Maura Murray, the disappearance of Brandon Lawson, and some other famous ones out there, like the disappearance of Elisa Lam, which was more or less solved rather quickly, though, people would bring up these witness sightings and stories, and they would expand upon them, and they would just keep adding more and more details, and then other people would start to think about things, and they would develop these types of false memories, and they would start trying to connect the dots on their own, and they would ultimately think about how they saw so-and-so, or they knew what was going on with so-and-so, they knew what was happening, they knew about certain things in the area, like, again, military types of operations, or there was some type of rogue group of individuals like what Slater was talking about right then and there. And I'm not even joking. I mean, with the disappearance of Brandon Lawson, one theory was that there was a group of people who supported the Republic of Texas, and they were in their own uniforms, and they abducted him because they thought that he was doing something disrespectful for Texas to Texas. I don't even really remember, because a lot of them are wild theories, but the point is that in missing persons cases, people get confused extremely easily, and the reason why is they're not in positions like Joseph Shones when you're just saying, okay, well, I was in the forest and I saw some people in the forest. No, what they're thinking is, okay, some people went missing in a forest and I'm 70 miles away. Now, I think I may have seen them. And then they start inventing these types of false memories and they get confused very easily. So this just happens time and time again. And I mean, I think we'll leave it at that. But I should also point out that it's not simply that I think that, because the authorities are very well aware that they're getting these types of conflicting reports. And in one of the later parts of the book, this is actually from page 185, we have the authorities wanting Joseph Shones, the witness, to take a lie detector test because they're noticing that he's just giving these conflicting stories. We're saying that maybe, it's somewhere between 2 and 12 people are the individuals that he saw that night, and he just goes on to become an unreliable witness. And I mean, I don't really even fault him too much for that because it seems like there were other priorities that he would have had. But, I mean, this is just something that needs to be pointed out when they're recognizing that the evidence that they have is eyewitness testimony. The eyewitness testimony is unreliable. And then they've located 3 of the boys outside of the trailer, 1 inside the trailer. And that's really all they have to go on. And there was some discussion about how there is one person that's still in the trailer, that's Ted. 3 of them left. They had lots of food rations. They had the ability to make heat, but it primarily wasn't used. And it has been speculated on or possibly believed that they just didn't know how to operate the heating units. They didn't even know how to open the cans at certain points because they may have lost awareness of their faculties. And as the things like the cold were kicking in, that would have affected their judgment. It would have affected their decision-making skills. And bear in mind that a lot of the boys, perhaps, even though they were aware of their cognitive functions, maybe they weren't extremely high functioning to begin with. And there was a search party that was launched for them, and this is actually on June 6th of 1978, that the remains of Jack and Bill Sterling were discovered. And that was, this is from page 202 in the book, and this was actually done by a search party of 40 people who located them. And they were found 3 miles from the trailer, and 3 miles is something that people would be able to walk. If they're walking through the snow, I would expect in about 1 hour to 1 hour and 30 minutes. Now, if they were in poor health, maybe 2 hours, and that's when hypothermia would have kicked in. But they're actually found on the Daniels Link campground. And I know that this is a tragedy, and this is very saddening, and rest in peace to them. But this also goes to show that some of these search party efforts can actually prove to be beneficial, because a lot of these high-profile missing persons cases have search parties that go on for years. There'll even be regular weekly meetups when people are out looking for somebody, just looking for clues of someone's disappearance, and they're unable to find them. But in the case of the Yuba County Five, they were able to find them. Now, it could be like this guy Slater said, that some ex-Marines who were part of the KKK threw them out of a helicopter. It could be that, or it could be that that person just invented the whole thing, and I will just leave it at that. But I mean, the search party was able to locate them. So in conclusion, I would like to just give my ultimate take on the subject, and I think that it's going to come down to just the string of wrong turns and mistakes, disorientation, all coming in together. Now, I am not 100% sold on this theory. In fact, if I'm just choosing one because I have to choose one, and I could simply just say, I don't know what happened, but perhaps it's a little bit more of an instinct, or perhaps it's because of insufficient evidence with all other things, like the presence of an outside threat, the presence of a psychotic episode, and just 5 guys who are coming home from a basketball game. Sometimes people miss the turn. Sometimes people are distracted, and they start trying to take a shortcut, and things just keep getting worse and worse and worse. And then when people are lost, they can also try to correct it by doing things that are a little bit more difficult than they have to be. Instead of backtracking and going back to a familiar place, people will keep trying to go down the wrong road until they recognize something that's familiar. But if they're going completely in the wrong direction, then that just makes things worse and worse. And then I mean, why they got out of the car, perhaps just looking for a house, looking for somebody, looking for some type of building of any kind. But it's so far to this trailer. Like, this trailer is not just on the side of the road. I mean, this would have been a substantial distance to the trailer, so that also begs the question as to how and why they would have done that, but that's ultimately the theory that I would go with. What do you think happened to the disappearance of the Yuba County Five? I mean, like, what do you think happened to the boys, if we're going to call them that? And also, what do you think happened to Gary Mathias? He was never located, and I guess I'm also in agreement with the theory that he perhaps just kept wandering. He was able to wander beyond the 3 mile radius from the trailer into the California wilderness, and he was never located. But do you think that there's any evidence of something else? Do you think there's any evidence of some type of foul play going on? Do you think there's any evidence of some type of external threat? And I would be completely open and willing to listen to theories about foul play. If somebody started a fight with them, if somebody threatened and intimidated them, or is holding them up for some reason to extort money out of them, if there were reasons to suspect that, I would be all eyes and ears. If you would like to read this book, it's called Things Aren't Right, The Disappearance of the Yuba County Five by Tony Wright, available on Amazon, and I'm sure it's available anywhere else you would get your books. And that will be all for me now. Anybody can write the show at blackboxonlineradio@AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box. And there was always BlackboxNid88 over on Instagram. And I will see you over there. Until next time.